I don't like tax cuts, and this might be one of the most unpopular opinions that I have. It certainly gets me the most vitriolic comments when I post on this or any other platform. But Congress is right now debating how to introduce a $4.5 trillion tax cut legislation into the House and Senate. It is a campaign promise, one they intend to deliver on. And so on the verge of another tax cut, I thought I could explain to you why I dislike them so much. You know, I'm not a robot. I do politically understand why people like them. I like money. I hate Congress. Ergo, if you give some of Congress's money back to me, I'm going to be happy. I mean, politically, they're bulletproof. They make perfect sense. Economically, they have almost no defense or justification because there are so many economic problems that Americans face that just a little bit money back in taxes are simply not going to solve. And that's why I dislike them so much. Not just because they cost so much money, but they are so ineffective at addressing economic issues, and they make those economic issues harder to address. So I will explain what I mean, but first let's set the scene. Since 2000, Congress has passed on 4 occasions massive tax cuts that have totaled $7 trillion. 2001, 2003, 2012, 2017, costing, respectively, 1.3 trillion, 0.35 trillion, 3.6 trillion, and $1.9 trillion, coming up to a total of $7.1 trillion that have already been spent on tax cuts this century. The tax bill that they're proposing is going to be at least 4.5 trillion, bringing the 25-year total potentially up to 11.6 trillion dollars. Even for the federal government, that is an incredible amount of money. But in any individual pocket, it's only going to make the difference of a few hundred, possibly a few $1,000s. There are problems that these tax cuts simply cannot solve. Can you afford rent? Can you afford to buy a home? Can you afford your mortgage payment or your homeowner's insurance payment? Can you afford childcare? Can you afford college tuition? Can you afford health insurance? Can you afford elder care or in-home care for a dying family member? If you had an extra $2,000, those problems cannot be solved. Certainly not if you had to solve all of them. I mean, maybe $2,000 will help you with rent, but it won't help you with rent and elder care and child care and college tuition. I mean, it's a pitiful amount in comparison. You having a little bit of extra money will not solve structural issues in the economy that require Congress to address. There are certain markets that are in some degree of failure. They're not producing enough, and what they're producing isn't affordable or high enough quality. That requires intervention, and that intervention is expensive, made doubly more so when we've put $7 trillion into a tax cut. I mean, even on a philosophical level, if I were to say, look, economic policy, we make projections, not predictions. We don't know what's going to happen. We're trying to put the best practice, the best method on it. My biggest problem with tax cuts is that if they were going to solve some problem and make America's economic lives easier, they should have done it a few $trillion ago. Like, if you were going to really make a massive difference of tax cuts, why do we need to keep doing them? If $7 trillion won't solve a problem, I implore you to try something else. Because I don't think 11.6 trillion is going to solve a problem that 7.1 trillion didn't solve already. And those problems need federal spending, now made doubly expensive because we just shoved $7 trillion at the door. So I'm going to do an exercise here to show you what I mean. Now, when we cost out legislation in the United States, it comes down to the Congressional Budget Office putting everything into what we call a 10-year score. So a $1.3 trillion tax cut in 2001 was actually about $130 billion a year for 10 years. And legally, CBO is required to put things in 10-year windows. So we have this chunk of 10 years and we know how much something costs. So I'm going to bring up some cost of some other things in a 10-year window just to give you an extent of how $7 trillion stacks up to some of the economic problems that you're facing. So in 2021, President Biden proposed the Build Back Better Act. It enumerated various proposals that were scored by CBO but not enacted by Congress, so we have an idea of how much these things cost, starting with childcare. Biden's proposal for childcare cost $350 billion. Let's assume that he undershot it, and that actually to have a universal 0 to 5 free high-quality childcare system, it would cost $500 billion a year. That means Congress has given away enough in tax cuts to have 14 free universal federal childcare programs. Just like stack them up, just like stack them one on top of each other. 14 child care systems for the cost that we spent on tax cuts. Another one is paid family and medical leave. This is when you get sick or you have a kid or maybe your mom or your sister or your husband or wife, they get sick and you need to get away from work for a little while to take care of them. A paid family leave program would give you some portion of your earnings while you're gone. Most Americans do not have access to this program, but there is a proposal to have it incorporated into the Social Security system so that it would be universal. It would follow you to every job that you have, and you would always be eligible for it. Its startup cost is around $250 billion, which means that Congress has given away enough in tax cuts to have 28 paid family leave systems in the United States. Another one, if you followed me for a while, you'll know that I love national school lunch and breakfast, and I think it should be free and universal for all kids. Not just that I don't like it when kids aren't hungry, but like, let's think of performance here. Free lunch and free breakfast is one of the cheapest ways to buy higher test scores in the United States. Well, food's not cheap, as we all know. And right now, over a 10-year period, we'll spend about $350 billion on school lunch and breakfast. So let's say we go and double it. Make it $700 billion. $700 billion and every kid in America gets breakfast and lunch at school. Well, again, Congress has given away in taxes enough to have, 10 meals. I sit down for breakfast, I've got 10 breakfasts. I sit down for lunch, I've got 10 lunches. We've given away 10 times the amount of money in tax cuts that we could spend on a universal school lunch and breakfast program. And I could keep going. I could go on for all of the things that we are giving away via tax cuts that would make it harder to buy on the back end. The unemployment rate is less than 4%, or is 4%, and we are running over $1.5 trillion in annual deficit. The U.S. is simply not collecting enough money, and it gets so hard to solve structural economic issues when you are already putting spending on a credit card. We need to have enough money going into the federal government to solve the economic problems that truly put a barrier on American households. And when you give away $7 trillion and doesn't solve it, it makes it harder to solve.